Mario's issue with hard cranking of his 4-liter engine may very well have to do with this second part of the question. I've charged the battery, and it has a reading of 12.71 volts after charging. After several hours, it only has a reading of 12.36 volts. Also, I've adjusted the spark timing to 8 degrees before top dead center, and the cranking is hard, so I retarded it to 5 degrees. It cranks fast, but there are moments that it is initially hard and then starts right away. Maybe I should also check the starter. After all, it has been operating since 1994. First of all, let's talk about battery needs. When Mario says that after standing the battery is at 12.36 volts, that sounds like it's over 12 volts. Some might think that's okay, but actually 12.36 volts is just about a 50% state of charge on the battery, so that's not good. Assuming that there's not a drain on the battery, an accessory that's staying on, or some aftermarket added feature that's draining current from the battery, the drop to 12.36 volts from 12.71 volts is an indication that the battery has issues. Also, Mario doesn't mention whether the battery is out of the vehicle or in the vehicle when it's being charged. And it's important to note that when you charge a battery, you should have it on a block of wood or some insulator that prevents the battery from draining to ground through the floor or from a workbench that is grounded to the floor. Also, the case of the battery should be clean because battery voltage can drain down the sides of a battery as well if there is enough conductive dirt or debris to allow a path from the positive side or post of the battery to ground. If there's still an issue with the voltage not stabilizing at least 12.6 volts, which is a full stated charge, it's highly likely that the battery is defective, has a dead cell. The water level in each of the cells should be checked with a hydrometer to see what the specific gravity is in each of the cells and see if the battery has enough electrolyte to survive. Remember, you don't add electrolyte to a battery that has been in service. You only add distilled water. Static battery voltage by itself may not be the whole picture. A battery that is defective often will not show that kind of defect unless under load. And I'll give you an example. On our 1999 ZJ Cherokee in the 4-wheel drive Mechanix magazine fleet, we recently had an issue where overnight on cranking in cold weather, the starter sounded like it was dragging, similar to Mario's 4.0-liter Jeep inline 6-cylinder engine as well. Once the engine started and the vehicle ran for a bit, when the battery voltage was checked, it indicated 12.8 volts, and it was assumed that the battery might be okay and maybe for some reason it had a low stated charge. This was not the case. And actually, I should have load tested that battery when it showed the first symptom. Load testing the battery is a simulation of the drain or amperage draw of the starter motor. You can often get a battery tested at an AutoZone or one of the retail stores where they will actually, for free, test your battery by putting a simulated load on it and seeing what the voltage stabilizes at once the heavy amperage draw has been applied. Since, like many four-wheelers, the battery in the ZJ Cherokee also powers a winch, heavy accessories like that draw a lot of amperage, I want to make sure the battery's in peak condition. So instead of relying on the surface voltage reading after running the engine, I decided to put a load on that battery. You can do a load test, like I said, at an AutoZone or whatever with a battery load tester, or you can simulate that by pulling the headlights on and allowing that drain to take place for several minutes, and then checking the battery voltage. And I'm going to talk about checking the battery voltage safely in just a moment. When I ran this test of simply pulling the headlights on for several minutes, turning the headlights off, and then took a voltage reading of the battery, it was down to 10.5 volts. What this told me is that when this battery was under load, the defect within the battery would show up. When it was not under load, driven the vehicle, shut it off, checked the battery voltage, it seemed just fine. In this case, the charging circuit's working just fine. It was showing around 14 volts of actual charging when the engine was running. If you do your own automotive work, a must-have tool is a volt ohm meter. This is a quality unit that I've had for years, and it works really well. This is optimal for checking circuits, for checking battery voltage, for checking continuity, and in general, doing quick troubleshooting at a very accurate degree. This has a digital readout and will read 1/8,000th of a volt. So given that, I can very readily check the battery voltage. However, I want to footnote that by saying if you believe a battery is defective, and even if it isn't defective, I would strongly suggest that you not check the voltage at the battery itself. You can find points in other areas of the electrical circuit where you'll get an accurate voltage read of the battery voltage without running the risk of creating a spark near the battery. This particular volt ohm meter is unlikely to create or generate that kind of a spark, but to be really safe, if you think the battery has a defect, and even if it doesn't, I suggest testing the battery voltage away from the battery itself. The alternator heavy charge lead is one point where you'll get actual battery voltage and a very clear signal. Mario went on to say in his note that his voltage was around 13.8 when the engine was running, and this would be a normal charge voltage. Again, his battery is likely defective, and if, like our situation with the ZJ Cherokee, he simply load tests that battery or has it load tested, it will likely turn up defective. As a footnote, we did replace the battery in the ZJ Cherokee, and I replaced it with a single battery with 800 cold cranking amps rating, which will handle the winch. From earlier vlogs, you know that I place a lot of value in a battery tender, and I'd emphasize the battery that we removed in January of 2013 was installed in the spring of 2005. We got more than adequate service out of that battery, especially a single battery in a vehicle that has a winch. Mario, if you replace your battery, which apparently is defective, your starter will get the amperage that it needs and the engine will crank properly. At that point, you can set the base timing and see how the engine starts. Again, a fully charged battery, a healthy battery, will have 12.6 volts static at full stated charge and will recover very quickly from a single cranking over of the engine. The battery should always bounce back to 12.6 or more volts if it's in top condition.